We've heard this morning a very powerful argument against a coexistence of communities, against immigration and so on, in the sense that immigrants would transform the culture of a community, and there would be sort of feuds between various communities and so on, as for instance the example was quoted, Estonians and Russians and so on. I wonder if there is a libertarian argument that could come out of the Ottoman experience, where for hundreds of years various communities lived together in relative harmony, and Greeks and Armenians and so on, as Mustafa Akyol has reminded us earlier. What was constitutive of the Ottoman identity? Because if culture and so on is identity, I mean, how did people view themselves as subjects of the empire, or Greeks, and have nothing to do with the Armenians, the Croatians, the Albanians, and so on? And what was the exact nature of their identity? Well, I will.
Let me try. Good question, thank you. Well, there can be an inspiration from the Ottoman Empire for a libertarian way of looking at these questions. But I think we should also realize that the Ottoman Empire kept these different communities autonomous and existing with their identities, partly thanks to the fact that it was a pre-modern social structures, and you had little interaction between these groups. For example, the Kurds, they were in their community, and they didn't, for example, there was no central education, or there was no, until the modern times, until the 19th century. So when you go and open a school in Damascus, which language that will be? And that's a new question which emerges. So I think modernization creates these ties, like railroads, telegraphs, education, bureaucracy, and what language that will be, and how will it operate? That's a new question, which was not there in the 16th century. So there is, so modernization unavoidably, brings these communities into each other, and you have to have some national, I think, system. For example, the Ottomans had a problem in the legal multiple systems they had. In the pre-modern time, until the 19th century, there were different legal structures. Christians had to go their own court. Their priests would take care of their issues. And Jews would deal in their legal issues with their rabbis. And Muslims would go to the church. It went on a long time, but the more you had slaves, the more you had further interaction between these groups, it became increasingly complex. The more and the more you had a legal case between a Muslim and a Christian and a Jew. So which court will take care of that? I mean, that question became more and more problematic. And then that's why they had to get this secular law. Based on the European idea, they reformed Ottoman laws and created a single law called Mentzel, which was called for all Ottoman citizens, regardless of their faith. So I think it is in the nature of modernity to be somewhat supra, traditional identities. But I think there are different ways of things. There's an authoritarian way of trying to crush everything and trying to wipe it out, like the French did after the Revolution, and like Britain tried to do. And then there's this more, I think, liberal way in which you, yes, create a national language, you teach Turkish people, but you don't go and ban Kurdish. It is there, and if they want to advance Kurdish language, so they can. But you also teach Turkish everybody, because if this is a country where people will find jobs, a common language is helpful. So I think there are two extremes, but we can get some inspiration from the fact that communities live in existence, coexist together, coexist together for centuries. I think there's an ideal we can get there. Is it an answer to your question?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think you're right. I think the crux of the matter is this idea of modernity, right? The only, just to put a little bit of a gloss on this here and there, even before the modern period, when the different groups groups had their own different law courts. When Muslims and Christians had some sort of case between one another, that happened actually all the time. There was a lot of trade going on, and there are many instances where they would just sort of decide between them, which would be, and sometimes they would go to a Christian court. Sometimes the Christians actually preferred going to Muslim courts because they believed they would get better justice served there. But the real problem is, I agree with you, comes during when the Ottomans tried to modernize, when they tried to turn the Ottoman Empire into something resembling a European state. The one, if I can just one last thing on this, something you mentioned this morning was very, very important. In 1876, there was a constitutional revolution in the empire that established the Ottoman Empire as a constitutional monarchy, and that lasted until 1878. And that was the constitution the Young Turks reinstituted in 1908. And in 1876, one of the things I've been interested in working with, one of the subjects in which I've been working, there's actually a fair amount of evidence that even then, even that late, there were plenty of Jews who were to participate in some kind of Ottoman project. And it seemed to be part of Ottomanism. It seemed like it was to create the equal identity for that, supposed to ethnic diversity as possible. But
some Jewish and Christian leaders didn't like that because it brought new responsibilities like compulsory military service. They were happy to pay a little bit more taxes to stay away from them. But now they were equal and they were supposed to go to the military. So some preferred the old ways, while some didn't like the new ways.
I'd like to ask Mustafa. I'd like to ask Mustafa about recent developments with the Kurdish Workers' Party and also the PJAK group, which is the Kurdish Iranian group. The arms captured by the British there all of the KKK terrorists were American arms that were identified Kurdish, not them from the U.S. Army either. And maybe you talk a little bit about the explanation with the PJAK organization who was trying to infiltrate and attack on the humanitarian attacks in Iran. And I wonder if you heard about the American Nation involvement. Seymour Hersh had a series of articles on the connection between CIA or other intelligence organizations and the PJAK. And finally, this Hersh also reported on the Israeli penetration of Christian. And the Israelis were actually training British commandos what purpose is either.
Well, good question. That's something the British press is tested, so all going on around here too. Well, first of all, each country has Kurds. Like Turkish Kurds, Iraqi Kurds, Iranian. It's real that they're not that especially Iraqi Kurds are important, and there's always been movements against Kurds. And some would assume that the Kurdish national because they're always together. But that doesn't work in that way anymore. And actually, Iraqi Kurds have their own all the time. They fight the government. And we know that Israel supported Kurds all the time, way before these states. Because we know Iraqi Kurds are some peacefully like country, which was mentioned in the government. So the nation was established. And I wouldn't be surprised that nation still goes on. And we all know that Kurds are now like the US now. So, sorry. Chief of Staff. As we're on, Iran is actually less ambitious for you. Less politically powerful than the US. But yes, it's key that. And especially when it's liberate. And it's exactly that the US is like US and other groups in Iran, particularly to regime like Punjab and so on. And these groups are looking to surprise if you're looking at crisis commission, doing social support, and I'm not intelligence expert, but I can't do a lot of something about it. The question is, does it mean that the US is supporting all Kurds, including our Kurds, including the cases of terrorist organization, pro-US, the US and foreign Kurds? I don't think so. And that it is possible, that's what our giving back might have this thing. Or it's not impossible to find Western resources, or it's possible that some of the Iraqi Kurds might have transferred to solve these weapons. The PKK is active in Northern Iraq. And that's one reason why people are not happy in Northern Iraq and doing training there. So, but it might, bottom line is that they're Kurdish Kurds, and they're terrorists and not different one symbol for all human rights. And the moves in Iran and Iraq are different. Different in their social structure, different in their ideology, and in general, aspects.
If I could follow up for 1 second. In my opinion, isn't the PKK and other guys, they share the country, they have the same camps, and they have the same leaders. The White House, one of the PKK leaders, is the achievement of the camp. They simply just change camps. So, I mean, you probably know what I'm saying, but what I've read is that PJAK is PKK and Israel.
Well, first of all, you should each and you closer to each other than the Iraqi Kurds. The Iraqi Kurds, Barzani, those groups. They are, but Barzani interventions, he said things that you should see in support of the US. But Barzani was with Turkey in the United States. So Barzani's policy kind of how Turkey behaves. Turkey is actually more threatening for the Iraqi Kurds. The plan is, well, then that's what we get. Turkey wanted to be about environmental change laws. This is right now happening. Turkey has been more constructive in this law. And now they're saying, okay, they think it's sense. So yes, that is more close to the UK. I don't think that they're the same thing, but it is how to be surprised. Still, my suggestion to this narrows the UK, so bring this great courage, frontier.
Additional questions. I was just government plan how I was additional questions. Second question, how in which cases and ranges where there's a checkpoint policy this has on the answer study, yours and important internationals.
I don't know the actual figures for the tax actual problem. The question about the increase, the additional tax paid by the host population. My understanding is that it's sometimes, in certain periods, I'm not here about 600 years, but my understanding is that frequently, if not always, the tax is close to a kind of tithe or alms that was paid by Muslims called zakat. So one body of literature argues that these are similar in size. Other things I've read said that the jizya, the tax paid by the poll tax paid by the Jews at times. So actually, no, the answer I would say it could vary over the other question I mentioned, I said that these almost all transferred because Muslim higher rate where they're French. So there's a lot of were translated to British.
As civilization subject to monarchical order, I think it's a certain position which is going to be decided by national revolution. The same seems to occur in Europe and elsewhere by the civil legal structure is open in favor of national movements. The situation and mostly all the lines in Europe.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I just want to think the end of the other also brought the end of the caliphate. Well, actually, it was reserved for 2 years more. Like in 22, the Sultanate was abolished. In 24, Caliphate was abolished. And now, from looking at it from today, some people say, well, would it be a good idea to keep the Caliphate? That's a debatable question. But one thing it lacked, too, is like you had no authority which can speak in the name of Islam. And you had all these crazy groups which can go out and issue fatwas and create all the right people. There's no authority which can say this is right or this is wrong. I mean, now people say like Bin Laden is supposed to try to create a caliphate, and all these groups are like different groups aspire to a caliphate. But the caliphate they have in mind is not what the Ottomans had. I mean, for example, the Ottoman caliphate, the most important Ottoman caliphate in the last time was Sultan Abdul Hamid, which like reigned for 36 years from 1876 to the October Revolution in 1908. And Sultan Abdul Hamid, and he was a modern man. He brought in many new things in the empire, like railroad, telegraph. He brought in many schools and universities, and he actually helped the United States make peace with the Muslims of the Philippines when the U.S. was in the Philippines. They had problems there, Moro Muslims. And then they came to Sultan Abdul Hamid and say, "Can you help us, make a deal with these Muslims here?" And he did. He sent a letter to the Philippines. He said, "I'm a caliph. Don't fight with these Americans. They're not that people. Just behave." And it happened. So, the caliph was also an authority that you could deal with, you could talk to, and you could ask him to, help your problems, solve your problems in Muslims in wherever, India or this or that. It's gone, and I don't know whether it's being helpful or it might not be that helpful.
Okay, so now this is more to Paul's question. This comes back to Christian's question earlier, because I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the case of Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century is a change in identity formation, in questions of self-ascribed and other ascribed identity. So this is something that we talked about a little bit before, but there is a change accompanying the 19th century with the importation of ideas like nationalism about who I am and what that entails. And one of the interesting questions, I think, about both the Ottoman and Habsburg empires is to look at the attempts that they made to try to solve that question. One thing that actually I've written on, I wrote a short article about this, was that the system in the Ottoman state is sometimes called the millet system, whereby each of these different organizations had, the different religious groups had a great deal of autonomy. Karl Renner actually proposed something like that as a solution for the troubles of the Habsburg Empire. Just as it was kind of being vitiated in the Ottoman Empire, Renner, writing under various pseudonyms, said we should try something like this in the Habsburg state as well. In both cases, though, I think it goes back to your question, because it comes down basically to a question of identity and also authority, where authority lies in the role of the state. In a powerful centralizing state, something like the millet system, with its different sort of multi-centric centers of law, it can't work, right? But in a decentralized, weak central state, it did work for some years.
And maybe just one thing, I totally agree, and I think it is also related with secularization, because in the Ottoman Empire, people, until the end of it, people identified themselves with their religion. Who are you? I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew. But now, who are you? Became, I'm a Turk, I'm an Albanian, I'm a Kurd. And that rise of this national or ethnic identity brought the other.
Can I just, yeah. Yes, but isn't it correct, for instance, that even long before Fatima, you had a not only religious, but multi-ethnic empire, and people were known by their nationality. I mean, they would be referred to as the Croatian Mehmet Ali, or the Albanese, or the whatever, Armenian, and so on. And they could reach, if they converted in the early stages, they could reach the highest position in the empire, become ministers and generals and so on. And after the Tanzimat, they no longer had to convert to Islam. And at the end of the empire, actually, I wonder if the Turks were not having a raw deal in the sense that all the major positions were held by people that were not ethnically Turks, exactly like in the in the Habsburg Empire. At the end of the empire, it was run by Hungarians more than by Austrians. So I don't know if I'm correct in saying this or not, but the ethnicity was very much part of individual identity, but yet everybody was an Ottoman.
I mean, that's true. The thing is, I mean, ethnicity was not denied, and people could easily refer to their ethnicity. Someone would be a Kurd, an Arab, or an Albanian, or a Croat, or a Serb. But that was not how people were legally defined. No, correct. Legally, you were defined as a Christian, an Armenian Christian. I mean, you would be defined as the church that you belong to. If you're Armenian, you're a member of the Armenian Orthodox Church. Or you could be an Armenian Catholic Church. That was also another thing. So you could, if you're a Muslim, you're a Muslim. And you know, so among Muslims, whether you are a Kurd, Arab, Albanian, Bosnian, whatever, it would only just specify you're from from New York. It's like that to give you an identity. Yes, but legally losing one's identity. And it is true that the Ottoman Empire was not a Turkish empire per se, because the Ottoman elite was very multi-ethnic. I mean, many Ottoman sultans had Christian wives. So actually, the son was very like a multicultural, ecumenical, if you will, child, and that would be the sultan. Today, it's no accident that some harsh Turkish nationalists in Turkey, some really Turkish racists, see the Ottoman Empire as a treason to Turkishness, because it was not fully Turkish, and it makes Turkish blood that the other ones, which they think is a mistake. And in today's Turkey, there's a clash between the people who aspire to the Ottoman heritage and who are diehard Turkish nationalists. Turkish nationalists see anything which is not Turkish as alien. But people who think more on the Ottoman line think, oh, we lived together for 1,000 years, what's the big deal? Why did we be Turkish? So that still those traditions coexist and clash.
Can I make one very brief follow-up to that? I think that the distinction you do is really crucial between this the sort of legally defined identity, which had nothing to do with ethnicity, and this sort of these monikers or nicknames that people sometimes had, alluding to some sort of ethnicity. The other thing that I might caution, a note of caution on terms like ethnicity, is these are very mutable categories, right? These terms like Arab or Albanian or even Turk, what those things meant what those terms meant in the 17th century are not necessarily what they mean to us today when we use ethnic terms like that. The final thing about this, about ethnicity and nationalism and these millettes, the crucial thing about the millettes is not only that they were defined religiously as opposed to ethnically, whatever that means, but that they were non-territorial. And that's also something that's crucial. It was a kind of personal legal system where law adhered to the individual person as opposed to a territory. And that's why in the post-Ottoman world, the nationalists faced so many problems. I mean, self-declared problems, because there were minorities, suddenly these national minorities living in sort of these islands all over the Ottoman successor states. And that's one of the legacies of the Millet system, where the Ottomans were able to maintain this multi-religion. So just again, just to go off that way.
The end of the what you want? I think this Millet system is interesting because it shows you that Islam did not, at least forcefully, plan to convert Christians and Jews into Islam. I mean, from the very beginning, Islamic law accepted them as what they are. And interestingly, at times, even before the Ottoman Empire, some Islamic emirs, sultans, didn't like Christians to convert into Islam because they were getting extra taxes. So keeping them as what they are is okay. So just be there and be Christian, live there, prosper, and pay an extra tax. That's fine for you. And that was also theologically possible because Islam thought that could be on those things, whereas like paganism was not tolerated. Idolatry was the heresy; it would not be tolerated. Christianity and Judaism was, except from the very beginning, and that theological base allowed the creation of such a relatively pluralist order in Islamic society.
Thank you.